Good afternoon, and welcome to Day 6 of Energy Finance 2020 Online. I'm Sandy Buchanan, Executive Director of the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio. Our session today is on this question: are petrochemicals the final frontier for fossil fuel survival? Our moderator is Lisa Hamilton. Lisa is the Adaptation Programs Director at the Georgetown Climate Center in Washington, D.C. Prior to this job, Lisa was the Climate and Energy Director at the Center for International Environmental Law, a consultant to the National Council of Environmental Legislators, and a regulatory and technical consultant for IEFA. And now I'd like to turn this over to Lisa to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you so much. And welcome, everybody. I'm really excited about this session this afternoon on petrochemicals. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping matters. We're going to do this session a little bit of a different way. We're going to have our first speaker pause for some Q&A, a second speaker, and then some more Q&A. And just second part will be a little bit interactive. What I hope you all will do, because we really want your questions, is to please place it in the chat box, and we will answer those questions at the end of the session. So again, as Sandy mentioned, we are talking about petrochemicals today. And before we get started, just to give a little bit of context about how this particular industry is particularly changing rapidly. Since about 2010, the petrochemical industry, and particularly its infrastructure, has faced an incredible boom by virtue of the expansion and availability of shale gas by hydraulic fracturing. More commonly called fracking. And with that boom, huge supply and availability of cheap natural gas inspired hundreds of projects. By one estimate, I believe in 2018, American Chemistry Council estimated over 300 petrochemical related projects that were fueled by natural gas, estimated $200 billion worth of projects. Now, since that time, when those projects were first estimated, the economics looked very favorable for the industry. There were projections for global growth, projections for increased demand of both plastic, particularly single-use plastic, and for petrochemicals like fertilizers. But here we are in 2020, and the world looks very different. We are very fortunate today to have Tom Sanzillo, the Director of Finance for IEFA. He is he's really, for the last decade, has really been a cornerstone of IEFA. I feel very fortunate to have had the pleasure to work with him. He's going to speak to us a little bit today based on his 30 years of both public and private experience as the first and former deputy comptroller for the state of New York, where he had billions of dollars of assets under management and managed their bond portfolio as well. He's going to provide us some insight about the market dynamics that are currently confronting petrochemical industry and the oil and gas sector, because in many ways, petrochemical single-use plastic was projected as a plan B for the industry as global demand for oil and gas with sort of offset by the increased rise of electric vehicles and decreased demand for oils for automobiles. Our second speaker today is Sharon Levine. She is a longtime resident of the 5th District of St. James Parish in Louisiana. She has been part of the legacy of African Americans born and raised in St. James Parish, who are part of that 85-mile stretch between Baton Rouge and New Orleans called Cancer Alley. In some areas within that region, individuals are 50%, the cancer rates in those areas are 50 times higher than what appears in the rest of the country. She will share her story of building Rise St. James, a faith-based organization, and challenging the intent of both the governor and industry to build more petrochemical facilities. So what we will do now, we will start with video from Tom, and when that video ends, we'll launch into some questions and answers.
Thanks everyone for logging into IEFA's virtual conference. Every year we've had this for a number of years. This is different. And where we're trying to do is the same thing we've always done, which is to share our research and meld our research with our teams all over the world of organizations, environmental organizations, labor, business, what have you, so that our organizing work and our research work are aligned and we are a more powerful force. IEFA's work recently in the plastics sector has resulted in us gaining a whole new vantage on the oil and gas sector, and that's really what I want to share with you today, where we've been and where we think we're going. The problem from a financial point of view is that prior to the pandemic, the oil and gas sector was suffering from an oversupply of resources. Essentially, what happened was fracking, an increase in production due to a new form of technology that produced more oil and gas than was needed, and that drove down prices so that those who were buying and selling oil and gas, particularly those who were using it for the purposes of plastics, did well initially and received lower prices. At the same time, plastics were increasing in demand around the world. And so those two factors made it a market signal, and the market signal was build more cracker plants, build more plastics manufacturing. At the same time this was going on, a third factor that's really little understood was going on, and that is that the oil and gas sector, which historically has made its profits from oil and gas extraction, was not making as much money as they used to. In fact, for the last 10 years, the oil and gas sector has been last in the stock market, whereas for decades before that they were first. They went from the world's most powerful sector to one of the weakest, and so they turned to the petrochemical sector, which had always been an investment for them, but it was never a really lucrative investment. But they now were looking to say, well, it's stable and it may be smaller, and we will resign ourselves to smaller profits and boost our petrochemical investments. And so you found then around the world, this was a global phenomenon, not just in the United States, Russia, Qatar, China, Iran, all the major countries that were involved with oil and gas announced new investments in petrochemicals. That drove the process in between 2009 and 2013. Was a whole lot of planning and new announcements, but it also oversupplied the market. And so when they were trying to plan these sites between 2009 and 2013, they were planning in an environment where plastics were about $1 a pound. And now in the current market, which is now they've come to fruition, many of the projects are going online, they're in construction, and they are facing a market where the price is 40 to 60 cents a pound, which substantially reduces the revenues to the point of making them only marginally profitable, as opposed to before where they look to be lucrative and robust. Recently, the ICIS, which is a leading analytical organization for the oil and gas sector, has announced that this build out, which was occurring all over the world, is over. It's not going to occur. Many of the projects that are in construction will complete construction but face a difficult market, and that the pandemic caused a major drop in demand at a time when they were already struggling. And so you have a double whammy, if you will, that occurred. And what also surfaces is a new set of risks that no one really saw before. They saw the price risk, which now is from $1 down to 40 to 60% lower. But there are other factors now that have come to the surface pre-pandemic economic analyses were that the economy was going to grow much slower than was necessary for the plastics industry. And when the economy grows slowly, there's less demand for plastics. So you have another risk factor. You also have a greater competition among the companies that are involved. As you would imagine, they're all building new plants and they're all looking to get into the market. And so the competition results in price discounts, which further depresses prices and makes the projects more financially problematic. Then on the demand side, you have a new recycling market for plastics that's growing, and it's in its formative stages. But it too is whittling away at some of the market share for the new cracker plants and plastics manufacturers, as well as local governments in the United States and around the world seeking to curb the use of single-purpose plastics. So you have a series of risks: the price risk, the oversupply, you have slower economic growth, and the like. And so other analysts like IHS Markit, which is probably the most prominent in the world, has basically said that the plans that were hatched during the 2009-2013 period were hatched on a series of economic assumptions that are no longer true, and that there is a real risk that many of the projects are going to be canceled, and many of them that will open to a very weak financial environment. So the response to the pandemic and the response to this environment is that many of the petrochemical and oil companies have been cutting their capital budgets. And we see a facility that's supposed to be in construction right now in Ohio, PTTGC, it's called. It's a Thailand company. They have put off their final investment decision indefinitely, looking to see if the markets will turn around. Sasol, which is a South African company, has opened up a chemical plant, and that plant in Louisiana has suffered from price increases and mismanagement, and they had to tell their shareholders that they were not going to be making 10.5% profit, but we're going to be making about 6% profits. So we're seeing the deterioration of the plastics and cracker markets right before our eyes. And so what IEFA is going to be doing is looking in the future at 5 or 6 major questions. Basically, is the economy going to expand at a rate that will absorb the excess plastics, and will do so fast enough to maintain profits for the industry? The second is, as the economy recovers, will the companies who really have the same business model simply revert to a mode of oversupply again, and to start building once prices start to turn around again, and running into the same problems that were there before the pandemic? Similarly, during the pandemic, things shifted within the plastic industry so that food packaging, medical supplies, and all became much more important, and automobile and industrial plastics, took a big hit. How that rebalances is a very big factor for the industry, and how it will recover, if it does at all. And we're going to be looking at whether or not the large consumers, like Coca-Cola of plastics, who have committed to greater levels of recycling content, do they keep those commitments? And that'll be a very significant factor for whether or not we're going to see a substantial, reduction and further weakening of the cracker industries. We're also looking to see if, as these plants go online, there will probably be there will be substantial write-offs in the billions of dollars, and whether or not the banks are then going to make it more difficult for them to borrow, causing the costs of the plants and the facilities to rise. So, in conclusion, the people who are advocating today to curb or eliminate some of the plastics products right now are doing so at a time when the industry is in severe distress. So the promises that many of these companies have been making to local officials, to communities, to allow them in the promises of jobs and taxes and better economic development are questionable, and they need to be scrutinized, very, very carefully. The outlook for the petrochemical industry is one where they would like us to believe that they are good partners for economic development, and we're seeing a significant series of questions to cause us to be skeptical about that. And then finally, what we are also looking for is we're looking for new partners and new allies, some from within the plastics industry itself and the recycling sector, and for the companies who are consumers looking to improve the recycled content, and looking for ways to reduce the dependence on plastics, and with it improve the environment and combat climate change, while still sustaining an industry that is in a very complicated situation. So that's where we're going. That's how we've been working, and how we're going to continue to work in the future.
Great. I think we're back now. So first of all, thank you, Tom. That was really a great video, a lot of information packed in there. And I want to see if we can sort of unpack the discussion a little bit. As we discussed in your video, there's been a lot of changes in the petrochemical industry. There have been a lot of ways in which projections that were true in 2009, 2010 inspired this huge boom between 2012, 2018, and now have changed the way in which projections we look at now by virtue of the pandemic. What do you attribute those changes to?
Well, there's the major big picture change is the fact that the oil and gas industry as a whole has been in a profit decline for a better part of a decade, and they are looking around for new sources of revenue and new, more stable sources of cash. They've always invested in the petrochemical industry. They've never really made the same level of profit that they made with oil wells and extraction. But they're now looking for something. In some ways, the whole move by the oil and gas sector, increasing its interest in petrochemicals is really a resignation to a lower level of profitability of the entire industry, and that shouldn't be forgotten. And that's true here. It's true around the world. And so you see that massive growth that you referred to of cracker facilities all over the world. The U.S. planned, I don't know, 18 or 19, but China planned 40. And you see that supply going into the market, driving down prices and causing depressed profitability, so that none of those cracker plants that were looking at one set of economics, which was a highly restricted market, a lot of demand, and an ability, therefore, to make profits from them, are now looking at lower prices, an oversupplied position, and also, as you pointed out, slower economic growth from both the pandemic, but also just before the pandemic, it was becoming clear that the economic assumptions being made about the economic growth were going to be changing. They will be smaller and of a different quality. And so I think those are your basic factors. You have an oversupply, a price decline. I wouldn't call it a collapse, because it's not like the oil and gas industry's collapse. Weaker economic growth are your major factors that are causing a generalized decline in profitability and a weakening of the viability of all those projects that were planned.
So it's interesting that you use the word collapse. And this is sort of my last question. We're getting some really good questions coming in on the chat. But, there's always been this question about, could the petrochemical industry be a true plan B and rescue mechanism for the oil and gas industry? Is that overstated? Is the sort of not, where are we in terms of this discussion of peak demand and whether or not the petrochemicals can really be the saving grace and really keep the industry in financially viable territory well into 2050?
Well, that depends what you mean by that. I mean, the industry, the oil and gas sector, and with it, the petrochemical industry, led the world markets for 20, 30 years. And in so leading the world markets were, making 20, 30, 40, some of the things that I was involved in were 60 and 80% profits. But that's no longer the case. It will no longer be the case. And the energy transition that all of us see is in fact a readjustment of the profitability of the oil and gas sector. So, will petrochemicals supply a good deal of revenue and profit for the oil and gas sector going into the future? More than likely, but at a much lower level than has been historically the case for the industry. And that means a much smaller industry, a much less financially important industry, and I believe from a political point of view, also a weaker industry.
That's really helpful to hear. And so in terms of the sort of, if we're looking at, and thank you for correcting me about conflating the sector versus the industries within the sector. We've seen a lot of rise in activity with recycling markets. They've had a tough time over the last several years with the collapse and closure of markets open in Asia. It's transformed the way in which a number of recycling businesses were able to operate. What role do you see the recycling business playing in the future of petrochemicals, and whether or not that market is a true threat to the financial profile of the new virgin plastic plants that are being built?
Yeah, I'll start with a financial argument and then go a little bit further in sort of the other direction. Financially, if the profitability of the industry, as I said, is declining, which means lower rates of return than were anticipated. And that will mean an adjustment by investors and by the companies. In terms of the impact of recycling on the financial viability of the petrochemical sector, it doesn't take 10 points of market share to to impair the profitability of the petrochemical industry. The impact that recycling could have, 1 or 2 points off the growth projections or market share projections of the petrochemical industry can have a extraordinary impact on profitability and investment. So that means that you're going to see you'll see a recycling market, and it's like any other new market. It's got problems in it, and it's a commodity market, so it has volatility problems and all kinds of geopolitical problems in the U.S. But you have to look at the other side of that. Around the world, there's also now billions of dollars being invested in the recycling markets, right? And those billions of dollars have behind them fairly substantial companies. And those companies are looking to make a return and looking to make the markets work. This is not just a few individual companies. These are fairly large capital sources. The second thing that you have, besides the profit motive that's being developed and pressed in the recycling side, is that many companies, and this is where a lot of the activism has really had an impact. Many companies have made promises to both their customers and to the public that they will be using 100% recycled plastics, and see that in some of the water products of Poland. I think already Poland Springs, at least publicly, is reporting they've achieved their 100% recycling goals. But then you have other companies like, I think it was Coca-Cola just recently said they wanted to do something around the country where they would get basically a new deposit charge in order to finance and stabilize the recycling markets because of the volatility that you were just referring to, and which to those of you who might be listening who had anything to do with bottle bills in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, when remembers that Coca-Cola was adamantly opposed to bottle bills, and now they are looking to use that same financial technique to stabilize a plastics recycling market. So you do have the volatility on the commodity side, which is causing stumbles in the industry. You have political opposition, obviously. I mean, within the plastics industry, there is opposition to plastics recycling, and so you see and the oil and gas sector as well. So it's a real conflict. It's something where the intervention of grassroots activity is really important, and it has an effect, and it has an effect on the capital markets.
So that's a perfect segue to the next series of questions that have come up in the chat. There's been some questions about who are these investors. We know that was different regions of the country. We've had a huge presence of Chinese investment that's come in certain places. There's some questions as to whether or not these are private equity firms that are taking a particular interest. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of who these investors are, what their risk tolerance is with respect to this? You just described a lot of volatility that I would guess that certain investors have more of a tolerance for than others. Can you just give us the overview of that?
Well, the petrochemical sector is a very big sector in the sense that the fossil fuels produce many kinds of chemicals and plastics. Anybody sitting in a room right now, probably 3/4 of your room is made of something made out of fossil fuels, from the petrochemical industry, from paint to computers to gizmos and gadgets and phones and what have you. So that's all. That's all likely to continue. And so to answer your question on the finances are the institutional investors that are behind some of the larger, companies that we all know. The institutional investors behind Dow Chemical, the institutional investors behind Exxon, behind all of them. I mean, they're the same investors. They're looking to secure a profit niche in the petrochemical sector. And they're looking at hopefully they're looking at it as a broader potential profit for the oil and gas sector than the oil and gas sector is currently providing. And then there are your speculative smaller company investments, and they dot the landscape in petrochemicals, largely not publicly traded, small companies made by entrepreneurs who are putting together, everything from little plastic bottles to all kinds of, badges for workers who might have, and it's just an endless array. The numbers are in the tens of thousands of products that are produced. And so it's produced with big institutional capital and small investors putting their money involved. It's both.
Great, that's super helpful. So I think we're just about wrapped up our time for this segment of the session. My hope is that we can particularly revisit when Sharon tells us a little bit about some of her challenges and experiences in Louisiana. So I think what we'll do right now is we will transition to Ms. Sharon Levine. As I mentioned before, she is from St. James Parish in Louisiana and has been engaged in leading her community in petrochemical expansion fights in that parish. So we'll roll video, please.
My name is Sharon Levine. I am the director and founder of a faith-based Christian organization called Rise St. James. I'm the daughter of a former civil rights leader. I'm a sister of 2 brothers and 1 sister. I'm the mother of 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. I am the grandmother of 12 grandchildren. I reside in St. James, Louisiana. Been here all my life. In the spring of 2018, our governor, John Bell Edward, made an announcement that he had approved a $9.4 billion plastic facility to come into St. James on the West Bank, 2 miles from where I live. I didn't understand why would he do something like that. That just didn't sit good with me at all. So one of my relatives by the name of Deborah, she told me that I should form an organization. I should get up and speak about the industry and speak about them putting industry into my community. I answered her, I'm not a public speaker. I'm just a teacher. I teach students of special needs. And that wasn't my calling to be a public speaker. So that she was kind of stern with me about it and telling me I could do it. And I told her that I was a member of an organization called HELP, Humanitarian Enterprise of Loving People. I joined HELP in the fall of 2015. I went to the meetings once a month. I enjoyed going to the meetings because I learned so much about the industry. And I learned how many refineries and chemical plants that we have in the 5th district. Come to find out we have 12 in a 10-mile radius. When Formosa said they were coming into St. James, that's when I asked the members of HELP, couldn't we stop it? They said, no, Sharon, we can't stop it because once the planning commission voted in, the parish councilor usually follow what the planning commission does. And I didn't understand how this worked. So I started going to the meetings and listening to people talk and finding out a whole lot of stuff that I didn't know. So in the fall of 2018, God must have talked to me or something because it put a change in me. With the HELP Association, we had a march on September 8th. I will never forget it. That was my first time speaking out. I had my paper already typed to read it because I'm not a public speaker, so I read it. Me and my daughter got up there and we spoke. After learning about this industry, how it would destroy us and destroy the people that's living here, and all about the chemicals, the cause of cancer and chemicals, and all the emissions that it will be putting in the air, in the water, and in the soil. We are already facing all of these things now with these other industry. So this industry would bring more. It would triple in the 5th district. It would double in the 4th district. In the 4th district, we have 9 chemical plants or refineries. And I couldn't rest. I just couldn't rest. The first meeting I had was in my den. We had almost 10 people there. And I told them, let's start an organization. So we did. We started one because I was tired of hearing people talk about nothing could be done and we couldn't do anything about the industry. So the next meeting I had, it was in my garage. We had almost 20 people there. Had chairs set up in the garage. The NAACP came. I made a big pot of gumbo so we can draw the people, because we down here, we love to cook and love to eat and stuff. So I figured that would be a nice little drawing card. So we had it in my garage and my daughter took notes. She had our laptop and we were just so excited. From there, we planned a march. We had our first march with Rise St. James on November 3rd, 2018. We had our little signs and walking and singing and chanting. It was nice. And that was my first time with a bull's horn, talking into that bull's horn. I talked so strong and told them how I didn't want this plant to come here, and it's not going to come here. We will not allow this industry to come here to destroy us. So from there, we started having marches. In 2019, we started having marches. We have one in May, we have one in October, and we've been going ever since. Ever since that, we've been going. And we stopped a chemical plant that wanted to come in Convent, Louisiana. That's across the river on the East Bay. This plant was from China, and we protested and we wrote letters and we talked to the parish council and we did everything we could do. We put letters to the editor in the paper. We did all kind of things, and that plant pulled out. It pulled out. It just went back to where it came from. Rise St. James, we try to protect the air, the soil, and the water in St. James Parish. We work on issues like that because if we can't protect our air, water, and soil, we're not going to live. We're not going to be healthy. My youngest daughter lived in St. James, but she kept on having headaches. So she moved to Baton Rouge. She don't have headaches as bad because of the pollution in the air. My oldest daughter was living with me. She would have sinus problems all the time. When she'd leave in the morning to go to work, she had to pass in front of 2 industries. They have so much emissions that they put out at night in the early part of the morning. When you pass by there, you could smell it. And it make your stomach turn. It would be so strong. So she moved out too. And that hurted me because my children were leaving. People are sick and they are dying. You can't even go outside for a period of time without breathing the stuff that they emit in the air. And if you don't believe me, you can come to St. James and see for yourself. They disregard human lives. They disregard people altogether. They do what they want to do. They're coming to St. James. Our public officials vote them in. I don't know what they tell these public officials, or do these public officials read? They just say yes for everything. When they want to put it in the East Bank, in the white neighborhoods, they vote no for it. When they want to put it in the 5th district, where there's just black people, mostly the majority black people in the 4th and 5th district, they vote yes for it because it's not in their neighborhood. It's in my neighborhood. The 7th district, they don't have industry in the 7th district. They don't have in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, but they have most of it is in the 4th and 5th district. And the 5th district has the most. That's where I live. It's horrible. And I don't feel, just like God told me, not to sell my home, not to sell my land. This is my land, this is my home, and I'm not giving it up for Formosa and nobody else.
Welcome back, everybody. So, Ms. Sharon, that was incredibly powerful, and I really want to thank you for being here with us today and for telling us a little bit about your campaign. I want to start off and just kind of take a step back. You're somebody who's been born and raised in St. James Parish. You are a mother, a grandmother. You have brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles. You have such a rich history there. Tell me what it was like growing up there, and between what it's like living there now.
Well, back when I was a little girl, everything was so wonderful. It was just like living the American dream. We had everything we wanted, everything from food, land. We lived off the land. My daddy had a farm with chickens, ducks, cows, hogs, and he had a black bull. I'll never forget that black bull. Whenever you had on red and you go toward the fence, that black bull would charge after you. I never forget that when I was a little girl. When I was in school, I played softball. My brother played football, and we played out in the yard together. We played with our neighbors. My daddy had a big yard and a big pasture with the farm animals in there. And I remember when I was a little girl, when it was time to slaughter the cattle, he would get that big rifle and would shoot the cow in the head. And he didn't want us to see that, but I saw it one day. And they would take the meat to the butcher and they would slice it up and make steaks out of it and bring it back home. And they would pack it and put it in the freezer and we would label it. So we didn't have to buy any meats. And the same with the hogs. We had hog-eared cheese, boudin, the red boudin, and the white boudin. You can't buy that anymore. It's not like homemade anymore. And that was good eatings. And he would get up in the morning, make homemade biscuits. And we would have fig preserves, our pear preserves. We had fig trees, pear trees, and we would can things. And my mother would put it in the jars and can it. I can't eat it anymore. I'm diabetic. So, but those were good eatings back there. And we had fresh cow milk. We didn't have to buy milk. We didn't have to buy eggs. My daddy would fix breakfast. He always did the breakfast. I don't know why, but my mama cooked the dinners. And when we would go to school and everything, he would make us, before we would, on the weekends, we had a garden with vegetables in it. And I never forget, he would get us up at 5 in the morning to go and pick butter beans, snap beans, okra. And I used to hate it because I didn't want to get up that early. But we had to get up early, to beat the sun. Mm-hmm. So he would take those big sacks of butter beans and vegetables, bring it to the French market in New Orleans and sell it. And that was money for our school clothes, school supplies, whatever we needed. Mm-hmm. And we live off that. Now, if I plant a fig tree, I had 2 fig trees to die. I had an orange tree to die. My lemon tree is still there, but it's not bearing the way it's supposed to bear. We don't have that anymore. I have about 7 pecan trees in my yard. I live on 20 acres of land. I have about 7. This year, they're not bearing. They skip a year. And whenever they do bear, it's not as plentiful as they used to be. It's so skimpy. I have 1 tree that might bear pecans, but inside the shell is empty. So the industry has taken all that away from us. When I was a little girl, I was never sick. We didn't have to go to the doctor except for our vaccinations. And we all got along. The people in St. James are so nice and friendly and helpful. When someone is in need, the community come together to help them. We live together as a family. And now the people are complaining because of the industry. The industry has done so much damage to our community. They bought people out. When they bought white people out, when the Black people asked to be bought out, they would answer, we bought the people who we wanted to buy out. And one man asked just recently, because he's living right next to a plant called YCI, Young, whatever the name of the plant is, from China. They are the plant that's bought our high school. He asking, can they be bought out? They don't have any money to give them to buy out. Mm. So some of the people are crying for help. Last night at our parish council meeting, the parish council voted for another amendment for Formosa. I was sick last night because I listened to it on the phone. I didn't know how to click in to ask questions, but somebody else asked questions for us, and they still voted it in. I wanted to be on the agenda last night. I asked them to put me on the agenda. They told me, okay. They called Monday and told me they couldn't put me on the agenda because they are going virtual. And I said, okay. But Formosa was on the agenda, and they voted last night for what Formosa wanted. So we are fighting this, and our parish council are on Formosa's side.
So before you start on that, and just sort of, that's where we are now with Formosa. You started in on this fight several years back, and I think you have had a victory. We started to talk about the Wanwan Chinese plant. So tell us a little bit about that journey for you. How you got involved? What made you decide to change focus from being, long-term community member to activist and leading a group and being the founder of an organization?
This wasn't nothing I planned. This happened all of a sudden. I was teaching school, and we started in our new school in the fall of 2018. I had no idea I would be doing this because I'm not a public speaker. I taught in my class. I spoke in my class because the children that I taught with special needs, and my heart goes out to those children. So my focus was on them the whole time I was teaching. And then when 2018, when I heard about Formosa, it did something to me. It clicked in my head because I'd been going to the Health Association meetings and listening, not speaking, just listening. And all the things they would say about the industry was coming in, and there's nothing you could do about it. The parish going to vote it in. And I said, the parish can't keep voting these things in. And just my cousin told me I need to speak up. And I told her, not me. So I guess I lied. So in October of 2018, that's when I formed the organization. I told some of the people in the Health Association, I said, it's time for us to do something. We have to find somebody to do something. and not knowing it would be me finding somebody. I found myself, I guess. So, but if it wouldn't have been for God speaking to me, I wouldn't be sitting right here today talking to you. God is the reason I'm speaking to you today, because He don't want to put this fight in me. When you say Formosa, that's a fight in me, and it's coming out. It's coming out. I'm sorry. I can't hold it back, because I'm getting ready to do a live stream, and I'm going to expose the parish council. I'm going to lose friends, but I don't care. That's better than the community losing their lives. They're going to thank me later on. I don't care. I don't need to be thanked. But the point is, if we don't fight Formosa, and Formosa is built, they have 14 industry inside the big complex. We will not be able to breathe the air. That's the point. I'm trying to make them see the point. Some people see the point, some people don't. I'm educating the public. So I'm going to do a live stream, and I'm going to tell them what's going on. A lot of people don't listen to the parish council meetings, like I didn't listen at one time either. So I plan to do that soon. And we plan to do a billboard telling Formosa, you're not welcome here. Don't come here. So that's when I started in October 2018. I retired in 2019, October 3rd, because I was doing a full-time job and I was so tired. So that must have been God's way of telling me to stop teaching and just do this. So if I didn't stop teaching, I'd have been run down because I was tired. I'd wake up in the morning tired. So I don't have that anymore.
So tell me, you not only were new to becoming an activist, advocate, speaking out, organizing. Tell me about some of the things that you've learned about how communities can be impactful, because you seem like somebody who haven't been intimidated by the governor's influence in the big politics. You haven't been influenced by the big money of a global industry. Like, what would you tell people who just want to know, what can I do in my community? I don't want any more facilities in my backyard either.
You have to get out and do it. You don't think about it, just go and do it. That's what I did. I didn't think about it. Just one day I said, let's form an organization. And they said, oh yes, let's form one. So I called a meeting. And it went from there and it flew. It looked like something just pushed us and went out there. Next thing you know, the next month, people calling and taking pictures of us. I said, where all this coming from? I don't want that. I just want to stop the plant. I didn't know all that came with stopping the plant. But I found out and I learned. And I have to stay up on what's going on. That's the biggest thing. What's going on with the parish council? If I don't hear something, they call me and tell me. They want me to do a march with the Black Lives. I say, I can't do everything. I'm trying to fight this plant. And y'all want me to stop doing what I'm doing to go organize a march? I said, let somebody else do that. Everything, they're calling me. One man wanted me to go talk to the mayor in the other district. It's in St. James Parish. I said, dear Lord, I can't do all of that. I'm only one person. I need someone to help me. I'm asking God to send me someone that could help me. I mean, really help me, work with me together, like sit here and we can figure out things together. It's hard to do it when you're by yourself. But the only thing that keeps me going, I know God is with me. And I know God is doing this. So that keeps me going. And I don't care if it is a $9.4 billion industry, nothing is impossible for God. And that's what I lean on. And that's what I tell everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. What is so interesting to me about both your presentations, yours, Sharon's, and Tom's, is that there is this story about these facilities. You look at it from a financial investment perspective. And Tom, you're looking at it from sort of the measurable, the metrics that typically dictate investment in large-scale infrastructure. But we often talk about the externalities. What are the real life impacts on people, on environment, on water, on air, on soil that are not factored in to these particular equations? And I know, Ms. Sharon, you were telling me about just the illnesses that have impacted your family and community, and just the cost that has had on your family. Tell us a little bit about some of what your experience has been like, and just the way in which that drives you to continue your fight in this struggle.
Well, first of all, my neighbor on both sides, one lady named is Helen. When she found out she had cancer, it was stage 4. She passed away. My neighbor on right side of me. When he found out he had cancer, it was on his side of his face, and he just died last year. One of the members in Rise St. James, he was outside cutting his grass and he fell to the ground. So when one day I was sitting on my porch, he stopped by to tell me that he was going to the doctor to see if he had bone cancer. He died in November. And one of the other ladies that was in Rise, she died in August. She was a warrior. She spoke out. She didn't care, but she wanted to move because the industry was killing her. The pollution was too much for them in that area, and nobody wanted to help them move. They would call on me. We have 2 people in wheelchairs down that street. They would call on me. I said, dear Lord, I don't know what to do. And I tell it to other people that let's help these people. The industry will not buy them out. All we ask for at first is to buy that street out. They won't buy them out. So they're suffering. They're in the middle of 2 industries, New Star and Marathon. Then our church is a little bit further over. We were asked, why not sell our homes? Why should we sell our homes? Why don't they go somewhere? And I mean, they come in here and they take over our highway. We just got an alert this morning saying the highway is going to be very busy this morning because of construction, because of Formosa. The parish council gave them the go ahead, something about a utility or servitude or something. So I'm going to pass there. I'll pass there almost every day. And if I don't pass there, other people pass and they call me and tell me what's going on. One said they had so many trucks out there. They don't care. They disregard everything. We have lawsuits against them. We have 4 attorneys that are working on this. We're trying to get some funding to hire another attorney to stop these, maybe to get these parish council members out. I don't know. I don't know what to do or how to do it, or should we vote the parish council members out? Do we have somebody else to run in their place? It's hard to find people to run against these people because they're all relatives. A lot of them are relatives. So I was asked to run for councilman, and I said, I don't want to run because God didn't tell me to run for councilman. I said, whenever God tell me to run, I'll run. But I'm pretty sure I could do a better job than them. I can't do anything. I can't do any worse because they're the one polluting us. They say yes to everything that come across the desk, except for when Rise asked them, to do a moratorium. We asked that since last year in November. I stood in front of them and read the paper and asked them for a moratorium. They haven't even answered it. When I went to them in December 23rd, I never forget, I read my little paper and told them, they have a grave site there and so forth. I don't think they even knew they had a grave site. I brought it to them on the 23rd of December last year. Did they act on it? No. Let Formosa come and tell them whatever. They're going to vote on it that same night. So we don't need politicians. If I had to form an organization to protect the community, why do we need them? We don't need these officials.
So we've gotten several questions in our chat, and I think it's amazing the close relationship between politicians and money, and politicians and investors. And one of the questions we've gotten are like, who are the investors in Formosa? And I'm hoping, Tom, you can help us answer that question to kind of dissect who these people are, how, what's their motivation, their drive. Tell us a little bit about the company, its structure, and some of the financial.
They're a very big company. We're just, ourselves are just starting on the analysis of it. But they are, they are supported through both government, and then they have private investors in many of these deals. So it's both, they can be treated in the same way we've gone after other investors. But I think what Sharon is saying is as clear to me as anything, is that the work that we do in our organization is financial and energy, and we can help to make the case. But we're just making a case in the energy and finance sector, and that is where the power is right now for how these things get decided. But the other power base is Sharon and the community organizing, and when she just said, we don't need the politicians. I'm a former public official, and I agree 100%. that the dynamic for change here is between the people in the communities and the companies that we can either kick out or get to cooperate. And that the political forces, and it's more or less true everywhere, more true in Louisiana than in many places, although I'm not unfamiliar with corruption everywhere. And so that's our dynamic. That's where we're going to win. And it's where we've been doing it. It's where we've been doing it in other communities. It's where Sharon's already won against one of the Chinese companies. It's where people have been organizing when organizing has been going on the coal plants around the country. It was between the community and those companies and the capital markets. We don't have. It's a sad statement as a former public official. We don't have public officials anymore. We just got us, and we're pretty potent. And so the organizing work that I see Sharon doing and other people who I work with is probably more important than any politics. They'll come and they'll do the right thing after we settle it with the businesses and stuff. But chasing the capital markets and chasing these companies out when they're doing what they're doing here is job number one. And there's this particular company. I mean, I've done enough research to know that this facility, if it wasn't built, in the whole scheme of things, would mean a damn. And probably the company itself is not going to make the return that it wanted to make in the first place. The pollution, the devastation, and the loss of human life is gratuitous. It's not even where it was 10 or 15 years ago, where they could say, well, we're going to make a lot of money, so we're going to do this. They're not even making a lot of money anymore. And they're doing it anyway. And it's a real, and it isn't a necessary plant for the functioning of the economy, but they just keep doing it. Because they can make a little bit of money, and they're scrambling. The big capital markets are all scrambling right now. And we pay the cost. The people pay the cost.
So, so just as, again, another housekeeping administrative issue, we're going to extend the Q&A to 2:15. I think we're getting some really interesting comments, and it seems like it would be a shame to cut this off early. What I would like to do, I want to kind of steer the conversation back a little bit on some of the finances, Tom, and then I think Sharon, for you, I want to get back to you because we're getting a lot of really powerful questions about your story is so compelling, and we really want to be able to support you in some way. And I don't know enough. I'd love for you to share with us about how people can help. You mentioned a webinar, and I think we've got some big groups on the call too who want to know comprehensively in terms of strategy, like what are your lawsuits currently that you're currently engaged in? What are those about? What are your campaigns? What are some big deadlines that maybe people can start thinking about? And then I'm hoping that Sandy and others can help connect our participants today with you and really truly begin to build some links and bridges with that. So given that we've got a few more minutes, excuse me, please. Tom, my question for you that came up in the chat, it sounds as if, clearly the industry could continue to do business as usual, build these plans, consider families like Sharon sort of gratuitous, sort of cost of doing business and so forth. How much of that cavalier attitude is nauseating anyway? But just from a financial perspective, how much of that is likely to lead to a stranded asset scenario? And how close are we to that now? And how is there a likelihood that would happen within the next 5 years, particularly where global growth projections have been offset by COVID?
Yeah, well, I don't really know what what everybody means by stranded assets anymore. I mean, just this year we've seen, I think, Shell write-offs almost $20 billion in investor losses from its oil and gas and petrochemical investments. BP, very similar numbers, 17, 18 billion. They're losing value. They've been losing value. Exxon, in less than 10 years ago was worth 500 billion, they're worth half that now, which is still a lot of money, and they're still pretty powerful, but they're not as big and as powerful as they used to be, and they're losing money all the time. So the question of whether or not the asset, and if they build Formosa, whether or not it'll have to shut because it has limited profitability and can no longer be done. We will see some of that go on. But what I would hope they would do, and we're seeing this as well, is there are cancellations of many of the projects that you mentioned early on. Dozens of cracker plants around the world that were once thought viable and have not been built yet can be stopped, and they should be stopped financially. This discussion that we've been having in Ohio on the PTTGC, which is a Thailand company, they're not sure whether they want to go forward, and they're not sure because of all the reasons we raised, plus the pandemic. I think Formosa faces the same thing, and the more pressure that can be built, maybe they walk away. I don't know. It looks like they're pretty far down the road, and but you never know. These boards. The boards of directors can be impacted sometimes in ways that we don't even understand. But they are impacted when people raise their voices and when people keep doing and putting the pressure on in the ways that they can. So they're vulnerable. The companies right now have to be looking at every one of their financial decisions a second time. And they think they don't care about the issues that we're raising here, and they want to just say, oh, it's just the cost of doing business. But they're getting the message is becoming louder on the public side about the discontent over fossil fuels from a climate point of view, and then from a local pollution point of view. It's much louder than it ever was. And then their finances are tighter. And they have to balance that as well. Those two things, I think, can go a long way to making them change a lot of the investment strategies that they're making over time. As we think more broadly about climate, it's all too slow, and there's too much devastation that's already been it's already occurred. But the moment is now to keep doing the work that we're doing.
Oh, for sure. I think I agree. I think that's right. I definitely. It's been interesting to watch just in this over the last several months with the Black Lives Matter movement, the power of reputational risk and the power of wanting to take a stand to be on the right side for purposes of consumer. To meet consumer demand for change. But it does bring me back to, we have a very certain, I feel like we have a different level of engagement and influence when it comes to social activism. And then you look at a country like China, and Chinese investment has been a very big part of this petrochemical build out in the United States. And Sharon, you mentioned that the Wanwan plant was part of the first victory that you had. I'm just curious, Tom, in terms of when you look at both political dynamics with Chinese investment, Trump's trade war, for example, and then you look at some of the ways in which they are abandoning plants. It sounds like they have a different motivating factor in terms of investment than like a Formosa. What do you think the different drivers are, and how important does a role does, I guess, give us an overview of Chinese investment in petrochemical build out. Maybe that's the best way to do it.
2 seconds. I don't, I'm not going to pretend expertise here, except to say that in the way that we've been looking at it is there is a general desire of most countries in the world, including China, to continue to control their own resources and their own markets. And with China, because it's so big, it's able to be a little more adventurous and politically adventurous and they have a financial agenda that is very different than how in terms of size of how the United States pursues its interests. But now there is this disagreement between the two countries, and there'll have to be a reset at some point. That's all going to take time, and I tend to look at these things somewhat strategically, somewhat from a market point of view. The strategy to me is I don't see Chinese investment taking place to support these projects in the U.S. in the near future. Doesn't mean it won't later on. And so any place there, we're seeing, there was a hope of bringing in a lot of Chinese investment into West Virginia. That's probably not going to happen to build out the plastics issues. There's some talk. PTTGC just lost their South Korean investments, and they're saying, "Oh, maybe we can bring in China and all that." That's a fantasy, that where it's just being raised, because the Chinese, they also have their own development issues, and the banking system there is going through changes where maybe the major motivation could have been political at one time. I think it's much more a balance between commercial interests and political interests, and so we can play to that as well, because these investments are not viable investments, and so we can begin to make those pitches as well. So I see, and with the current trade tensions, it's probably, in the short term, useful for us stopping projects. But I don't know how it's going to be in the long run. I don't know.
So just in terms of, given the sort of unique dynamic, it's like Formosa's a Taiwan company, and you've got this sort of one country, two system kind. Yeah. Are there people looking at the way in which that dynamic may or may not be having an influence in sort of the unfold? Like, is it a competition issue? Is it I'm just curious the extent to which those particular political dynamics may be impacting investment.
The disruption between Taiwan and China is going to have an impact on this project. I don't know how. We're learning, every day. We have some staff over that side of the world, and we're, turning our attention to it and trying to figure it out. I'm not going to say I know for sure what the political dynamics are, but when there is that whole move of South Korea moving to Dalim moving away from PTTG, which was a Thailand plant, is showing us lots of things about both where the Thailand government is, where the South Korean government is regarding not just the money, but the technologies that they wanted to bring into the United States, and whether or not that's actually viable given the very trade issues that you just talked about, and so yes, to answer they become more complicated, and you need smooth, normalized trade relationships in order to make these things work. And when they're in conflict or in turmoil, that will suggest delays here in the United States, independent of regulatory delays that might otherwise be experienced, or delays that are created because of community opposition. So and those delays over time. The projects become more expensive, they become more time consuming, they become more of a problem, and they're marginally profitable at this point. So that's why I argue for more community organizing and more kind of advocacy, like the kind that a number of us are doing, to go to the banks, to go to these import-export banks, and to go to the governments of those countries and say, maybe this isn't the best thing here, but it's got to come from the grassroots, because our politicians, they seem to be deaf.
Yeah. Well, I like that point, is that all of these geopolitical uncertainties, all of the trade related issues, all of it means that Sharon Formosa is not a sure thing, and don't you stop fighting, because God knows that you got a lot of people supporting you and encouraging you, and who very interested in supporting you. And so just before we wrap up, I just kind of wanted to get from you, Sharon, a sense of what are some of the things and some of the ways that people can support you, participate far or near, whether they're in Louisiana or in Mexico or in New Zealand. I think there are a lot of people who know, don't laugh, there are a lot of people who know that this plan exists, that its expansion is, that it's unnecessary, it's contributing to oversupply, and it's certainly not worth the lives and livelihood of your family and community. So please just take a couple of minutes, let us know how we can better support you.
First of all, you can support me, first of all, with prayers. Second, you can support me by getting me in touch with Joe Biden. That's the second thing. Third thing you can do is call my governor, John Bell Edward. He can stop this right now. He's the governor of this state. He won't meet with me because of, I guess because of the virus, but before the virus came, he wasn't meeting with me. And when I saw him on November the 1st last year, he came to get my vote. Then I couldn't get a meeting with him after that. I called his office and we set up meetings and stuff. I couldn't get to him. So if you can call John Bell Edward and ask him to put a halt to this industry, or at least until the pandemic is over, then we can go from there. But if I can speak with Joe Biden, if I can meet him face to face, I think I would be able to talk to him and tell him what's going on in St. James. I would like for him to come to St. James, not just pass by on interstate, come on the River Road on Highway 18 and see what's going on. Once he see it, he will know what I'm talking about.
I believe you. I believe you. All right. From your lips to God's ears. We've got to charge people. If you've been listening, you don't leave this conversation and think and leave it there. We've got some people to support in St. James Parish. So, all right. Miss Sandy, I want to thank everybody who has been participating, who joined us, and I'll hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharon, Tom, and Lisa, for that very powerful conversation. And we hope that if you would like to keep the conversation going, you can stay here on the website. There's a function where you can chat, you can connect with the other participants. And there is a Twitter feed going on at hashtag AIFA 2020. And, as we saw here today, that one of the wonderful things about this conference is that we learn so much from the work that people are doing around the world in their own communities. And part of the way we're highlighting that this year, since we can't all be face to face, is with a series of videos. And just as this session ends, we're going to play a video for you on the wonderful work of Cambio Puerto Rico, led by Ingrid Vila Biaggi. And I hope that you will stay and watch that. It just takes about 8 minutes. And we also hope that you will be right back here with us on Tuesday, when we will start another session at the same time on renewables taking market share from fossil fuels. Thanks again, and goodbye.
I'm Ingrid Vila. I'm an environmental engineer, so that's how I got into environmental issues. I actually studied environmental engineering. I have a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering from Cornell University and a master's in environmental engineering with specialty on water studies from Stanford University. I've served in government a couple of times. The most recent one, I served as Chief of Staff for the Commonwealth in 2013 and 2014.
I had the pleasure of meeting Ingrid a number of years ago when she served as Chief of Staff in the Governor's Office in Puerto Rico, while I was serving as the Regional Administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency. Ingrid is one of the single most effective professionals I've ever had the privilege of working with. I worked very closely with her on trying to get support and resources to an economically struggling but absolutely beautiful community called Caño Martin Peña, where there was an effort to get people better housing and to dredge an old canal so that it could be ecologically restored and be a resource for the community. We didn't really call it climate change resiliency at the time, but that's exactly what it was. I also worked with Ingrid on trying to convince the U.S. military to clean up the Vieques firing range. For over 60 years, the beautiful tropical island of Vieques was used for military operations and practice ranges. The Department of Defense left behind a legacy of unexploded ordnance. It was a federal Superfund site that EPA was responsible to clean up. Having a partner in the governor's office to try to pick up the pace on that cleanup was really helpful.
Right after I left government, I founded a non-for-profit organization in Puerto Rico called Cambio to support communities and promote sustainable and responsible actions for Puerto Rico. We started Cambio in 2015. Our first project was supporting communities who were fighting against a waste incinerator that was being proposed for Arecibo, Puerto Rico. Communities were opposing this project, yet government was not paying attention to their claims. So we came in and started supporting communities, working together with them.
They wanted to build the incinerator of trash in Arecibo. And it was a struggle that it took us at least about almost 10 years. Ingrid has been a big help to us with all these other people, experts, scientists, doctors, and academic people, religious people. I think we did a real good job educating the population to understand why we were against this incinerator, because, it contaminated, and the health issues, the environmental issues. So we're very happy that we have prevailed.
After Hurricane Maria, the island was left entirely without power. A lot of sectors didn't get power back for up to a year. So we started focusing on energy and sustainable energy alternatives. Unfortunately, in 2018, right after the hurricane, the governor announced that he was going to transform the electric grid, but he was going to do so through privatization and through methods that would continue to pursue fossil fuel investments on the island. And that's how we came up with Queremos Sol, which is the shirt I'm wearing today.
Queremos Sol, which is we want sun in English. It's a very diverse group, but very many people from different organizations. We have the Electric Union from Puerto Rico as part of Queremos Sol. We have professors from the universities. We want to transform our electric system to use renewables. Okay? We live in Puerto Rico. We live in the tropics. We've got sun all year.
We're proposing a sustainable transition to 100% renewable energy using rooftop solar and battery storage, and also promoting a collective purchase alternative that will make it more feasible for communities to be able to acquire solar PV systems. The proposal would put more power to the people. People would have ownership of the system. They would have control of consumption. So the consumer transitions to being someone who is active in the system, in the grid, in participating in decisions that are being made, instead of just being a passive customer. The damage and the shock that Hurricane Maria represented to the people of Puerto Rico suddenly opened the door for people to be receptive to alternatives, for people to start to think about what is the condition of our energy infrastructure and what is the most sensible solution to reduce vulnerability.
We need to invest the infrastructure money on rooftops, solar, renewables. We keep insisting on that, and we keep insisting that why it's important that no more fossil fuels in Puerto Rico, no more. And so people now are getting more interested in finding out. I want to know more about this Queremos Sol group.
In terms of the coming year, I'm quite excited about developing this model for collective solar purchase on the island to see if we can actually develop something that will make it affordable for people to be able to acquire these systems. At the same time, I'm quite excited about a modeling work that we're doing actually along with AIFA that will detail what type of investments in infrastructures need to happen in order to get to 100% renewable using rooftop solar. And that is going to be a really powerful tool, because when we are able to demonstrate with modeling that this is something attainable, that this is something that can be done. I think it'll be really difficult for the power authority executives and those in charge in government to tell us that this is something that cannot be done, or something that is too costly, or something that could be considered maybe in the future, but not now. So when we finish this modeling work, I think we're going to be in an even better position to pursue our objectives in Queremos Sol.
It's a no-brainer, and Puerto Rico will only transition to a clean energy future if the leadership comes from the residents of Puerto Rico. But the residents also need some technical expertise and some strategic support, and that's where Ingrid comes in. No one's better at this in Puerto Rico than Ingrid. I would argue no one's better than this in the country.
Ingrid Vila is, one of the most extraordinary people I have ever met. I'm very proud of her. With her knowledge and her determination, to do what's right and to help so many people, I think that we can do this now.